My name is Memo Ngui from Industrial Psychology Consultants. My guest today is Dr. Simon Moore from the UK. They are our friends. I'm sure you know we've got a very good relationship with the UK, Zimbabwe and the UK. So we take this opportunity to thank Dr. Moore for agreeing to give this presentation to the Zimbabwean community, the HR community and the psychology community. Those who have joined from those different communities, thank you very much for joining. This program is recorded. We'll share it afterwards. We'll also give Dr. Moore a link to join, to see the recording at some stage. Hopefully tomorrow I can share the link with Dr. Moore. I will allow Dr. Moore to introduce himself. Then we go straight into the presentation. At the end of this session, we allow you to ask questions. You can also share your questions via the chat platform. If you don't want to ask Dr. Moore directly, I'll ask the questions on your behalf. You can share with me privately or in public. That is the platform that is there. But I will definitely open the session at the end. Once he finishes, we'll open the session for you to ask any questions. The topic for today is the psychological basis of employee loyalty and productivity. This is a very important topic. Others may have underestimated the importance of this topic, but I think that's the crux of the matter. If you're running any organization, where you're managing people, you're worried about loyalty because you don't want to lose your people. You're worried about productivity because that's the reason why these organizations exist, so that people can be productive. So I won't take the limelight from Dr. Moore's presentation. Dr. Moore, welcome to Zimbabwe virtually. And I'll now hand over to you to introduce yourself and take it over.
Thank you, Memory. Good morning, good afternoon for some people, I guess. It's a dull day in London, which is typical. I'm sure the weather's nicer where you are. Yeah, we haven't had rain yet, but hey, this is London, so any time now, I would imagine. So thanks for the introduction, Memory. And as Memory said, we're going to look at some psychology today. And I'm going to try my best to talk 100 years of psychology in 40 minutes. So wish me luck. But hopefully the topics will be of interest. And I've got some things for you to do as well. So, don't feel you can kind of relax too much. I'm going to kind of it's going to be interactive. So hopefully we kind of, I know I learn from doing things. So I think it's all very well listening to people. But sometimes, if we actually do things, we kind of use examples to kind of see, what do we mean by this? So to kind of give you some context of who we are. So we're a group of psychologists who, and those of you know something about psychology will understand it's a little bit like medicine, and there are lots of different subdisciplines. And to understand human behavior, we have to kind of obviously understand the kind of the way people think, so how their brains kind of develop and work, their social interactions, so the kind of relationships they have with people, the context, and these things are pretty important in terms of employee behavior, as we shall see. So kind of my team look at these kinds of things. They look at audiences, and typically we try to work out why people are doing things and perhaps why they're not doing things, and it's not always the obvious reasons why that might be. And then we try to help companies operationalize and cause that change. And so we try to kind of ally the employee and the employer so that they better understand each other. And as we shall see, those kind of shared values are actually quite important. So we're quite small. There's probably about 9 of us, and we kind of work all over the world. And we work with big and small organizations. It doesn't make a difference to us because we're dealing with people. So, and as psychologists, we're generally quite nosy people. I think that's one of the reasons why people go into psychology, because they're quite nosy about everybody. So that helps us ask questions. And so we kind of go into organizations, as I said, with our psychology expertise and kind of slot in with what's already there to try and understand what might be happening or what we could do that might kind of benefit the organization and the employee audience. I guess in a nutshell, we try to make things a little bit clearer. So there are often times where things are happening in an organization where, interviews are okay, questionnaires might work, you can ask people questions. Unfortunately, some of the time people themselves are not actually aware about why something's happening. If you think about a lot of the stuff that you do in your life, as we shall see, a lot of it is automated.
Hello, there's someone there. Can you mute? Hello, Admire. Admire. Okay, Dr. Moore, I'm sure you can proceed.
That's all right. Thank you. So what we're going to try and do then in the next 35 minutes is do 4 things, really. We're going to look at the non-conscious behavior. And this is actually quite fascinating. We're going to look at the human needs. And when we talk about human needs, it's not personality. Personality is a little bit unstable. Certainly my personality is unstable, and I'm just sure some of yours are. That it changes according to who you're with, according to the context you're in, and the time of day, actually. So I can be shy at certain times and with certain people, but other times I can be more confident. So measuring personality isn't for us a reliable statistic in terms of trying to find out why something's happening. We talk more about human needs, and these are common and they're shared globally. So it makes no difference if we're in Zimbabwe, UK, Mexico, China. These human needs are pretty kind of prevalent. And we'll talk about these and show you the power of these in terms of how they influence behavior at work. And then I'm going to talk about 5 actual factors that are related to needs within the work context that I think might be useful for everybody to kind of think about. And then I thought it might be quite nice to end with some little bit of a summary about potential solutions or ways of we could operationalize this immediately for you guys if you're finding that there's stuff you need to do at work that might be helpful for you. So that's the plan. And then as Mary said, I'm more than happy to take questions. And if we run out of time, I'm more than happy to take questions over email or follow up. So let's see how we get on. So this is a concept that's becoming quite important now in both customer and employee space. And it's the non-conscious aspects of human behavior. So those people who drive a car can actually relate to this. So it's very funny, isn't it, that we get into a large metal object and we can actually travel very fast in this large metal object. And yet, if I ask you what happened in your journey in the car, you'll probably remember 3 things. Getting into the car and starting, getting out of the car when you've ended, and perhaps whether you've had a kind of, there's something interesting to see, or there was a near miss accident, or, you got into some difficulty. Everything else you kind of forget because it goes into automation. And that sounds quite scary, doesn't it? Being actually not really conscious of driving all the time. So that's a really good example to show you that a lot of our behavior actually goes into automation. And that's exactly the same in the work environment. We don't want to get overloaded. And there's a big reason for this. So let's talk about why this is actually an important topic. So let's think about friends. So hopefully, who here's got a friend? That's not a very hard question. Hopefully you've all got a friend. Hopefully you've got more than one friend. But let's think about the psychological reason about why you are their friend and why they are your friend. So let's ask some questions. So do you have some friends that you've become their friend because of the length of your legs? Or have you become a friend because you have certain number of hairs on your arms? Or is it the length of your earlobes? I would hope not. I would imagine you are friends because of the emotional connection and the emotional offering that these people bring to you and you give to them. So in actual fact, what we become is we become an emotional commodity or a resource. So if you think about your good friends, you can probably summarize them very quickly in one word what they mean to you. So you probably got a funny friend. You probably have a supportive friend that you ring when you're in problems, or they ring you when they have a problem. So we're very quick to kind of non-consciously label people into what actually do they mean to me, what do they offer me, and what resource are they? And that's done at a very non-conscious level. We don't mean to do this, but actually, if we think about all of our friends and think about them in a very complex way, that's going to be very tiring to our brain system because there's lots of information there and we become overloaded quite quickly. Now, my point here is This is exactly what employees do at work. Okay, so they do not process things in a logical, kind of conscious way a lot of the time. A lot of the things that they think about at work is driven by the kind of automated brain system. Because think about it, I don't need to tell you this, work's busy. There's lots to do. There's lots to think about. There's lots of people to interact with. There's lots of jobs, tasks, deadlines. So if we had to kind of consciously think about these things, you know, it would affect our mental health. We would become overloaded quite quickly. Stress rates would go up. Depression would increase. So there is a reason why this automated system actually tries to help us. Now, that's a positive in the fact that it does try to help us. Unfortunately, there are kind of negative consequences of that. So these kind of shortcuts are called heuristics, and you've probably heard of this. And heuristics are cognitive, kind of lazy ways to deal with lots of information. Okay, so when you meet a new person, okay, what do? You don't spend half an hour really getting to know them quite well. Probably within the first 30 seconds, just by their visual appearance and what they're wearing and how they sound, you've already created some kind of labels about them. And these are down to this kind of non-conscious way that we label the kind of world around us. And I said, you know, employees do this. So they'll do this with co-colleagues. They'll do this with their kind of leaders and their bosses. They do it with the organization in terms of what does it mean for me from an ethical or a value point of view. And these first impressions are really, really psychologically important because they're very hard to shift. So for example, when someone onboards in a company, when they join a company, they will use a lot of these non-conscious systems to judge, is this company relevant to me? Is it a positive company? Are the kind of work environment conducive of development for me? They don't spend time to get to understand whether this is true or not. Okay, they use these quick systems to, did I make the right decision? Have I joined the right company? Is this going to be good for me? So it's a very quick way of doing stuff. It's quite shocking, really. There was a big study that came out from Harvard Business School last year. They spent 15 years looking at financial people, health consultants, all these kind of people who you think, you know, are kind of very logical people, very scientific, very number driven. And what they found was actually, of all the decisions they made, probably, if I was going to be kind, 15% of their decisions are actually things they really carefully think about. Okay, so that's quite shocking because that would indicate that 85% of what they're doing, they're not really aware why they're doing it. And we are similar. And this is humans. So this is the downside of having a non-conscious system, in the fact that on the positive, it helps us kind of deal with lots of information and not become overloaded. On the negative side, though, we can make very quick decisions. So stereotyping, for example, kind of, you know, that kind of stuff is very quick. What do you look like? You're this person, right? You're in this box. And that's what happens. So this is a big problem at work. And this is actually a big problem for employers in terms of dealing with employees, because actually employers are using very logical communication systems to try and interact with their employees. And the employees are not using the logical systems to kind of understand what is being said to them. They're just looking at how does it make me feel? Okay, so they're not looking at the words or the statistics you're using to say, you know, 90% of our employees said that we're a really good, positive organization, that we have great values. If the employee doesn't feel that from a non-conscious point of view, they won't believe it. So a little bit later, we'll think about how can we deal with this information? How can we better position kind of interactions with employees to kind of understand and use this non-conscious system to kind of help, you know, the employee-employer interactions. And this is because, look, if you look at the brain, there are two parts of the brain. You've got the kind of neocortex over here. And the neocortex is the logical part of the brain. It deals with facts. It deals with numbers. Now, this is a bit of a shock because actually it accounts for maybe a fifth of the brain. It's a very small part of the brain. The largest part of the brain is the limbic system here. And this deals with feelings, how you feel about something. And what we tend to do is we tend to lean into things that make us we think are going to make us feel good or satisfied or pleased or easy or secure. And we tend to kind of pull away, withdraw from things that are a threat, insecure, going to challenge my ego, going to challenge my intellect. Now you can see then why this is a problem at work, because there are lots of things at work that challenge ego. There are lots of things at work that challenge intellect. There are lots of things at work that challenge status. So the non-conscious system is actually really important at work to try and understand, because it actually drives a lot of employee behavior. So we think generally that if we tell people, you know, don't be stressed because of these 5 reasons, if people don't feel that that is actually going to solve their problem, they're not going to listen to you, despite the fact this might be scientific health information that's given from very kind of intelligent people. It's the feeling. And if you think about your interaction with people, you know, think about your relationships with people. If you don't feel this is right, and it might be very factual and it might be very correct, but if you don't feel this is correct, it's the feeling that drives it. And so you don't believe it and you don't kind of interact in a positive way. And you might be wrong, but you feel that you know, this is not appropriate for you, or this is not making me feel complete, or this is scary. This is kind of like, you know, making me feel insecure. This is challenging my ego. So we withdraw. And this is why relationships break down a lot of the time with employees at work. So I thought it would be interesting for you guys to kind of understand that there's a hidden world that we need to understand about in terms of how can we understand this impacting the kind of relationships, and it also interacts with productivity and loyalty. Okay, because productivity is based on motivation and motivation is based on emotion. If we're feeling positive in an emotional perspective, we're going to put more effort and we're going to try harder. If we don't feel good and we feel kind of scared, we feel sad, we're going to withdraw and we're not going to use as much kind of energy. So we become unproductive, for example. And there are other consequences of that. So you know that people who are negative in kind of emotions are also not open to new ideas. We also know in the last 5 years that people who are not very kind of open to new ideas are not very creative. So you kind of see there's a whole cascade of problems that happens if you don't understand the emotional world of the employee. So look, I thought it'd be interesting to show you. I'm being a bit kind here because I've made the rational brain a little bit bigger than it really is. But if you look at the brain, the large part of the brain is emotional. Okay, so many years ago, and you probably understand now that, you know, 30 years ago, employers thought that salary and job title and status would attract people and keep people happy and would make them productive and make them loyal. And we now know that's not true. But more importantly, we know why that's not true. And it's not true because the emotional brain actually accounts for 4 or 5 times the amount of input than the rational. So actually the emotional brain saying, well, okay, the salary's all right and my job title's quite good, but what's my purpose? And do I feel connected? And am I being valued here? And do I feel that I have a common kind of goal? And do I share the same values as the company? And if I don't, then I'm going to become dissatisfied. I'm going to become disconnected. And I'm probably going to think about leaving. I'm probably not going to be very productive either. So there are all sorts of reasons why we as psychologists kind of attach so much importance to this kind of emotional kind of part of the brain here. So that kind of follows on to the impact. Okay, so we can see, look, if you look at the non-conscious brain and you understand that it's 5 times as important as facts and figures, we know why kind of employees can have kind of negative experiences and why they use that emotional brain to kind of, I suppose, appraise your organization. So they'll ask all these kinds of questions here on the right-hand side. So, you know, does the organization actually get me? Do I get the organization? That's a common question that we forget. Do I understand what the organization stands for? What's it about? Is that making me feel emotionally comfortable? Or is it not? Is it motivating me? Because I subscribe to this. I really like their purpose. I really like it. Emotionally, I'm really connected with this. So you can see how this kind of motivates people from an emotional, non-conscious perspective. Now, if we kind of combine that with needs, okay, so think about the brain, and now I'm going to think about another concept from psychology which become really important in the employee space, is human needs. Okay, so what do we mean by human needs? So let's give you an example. So have a look at this picture. It's a real place. I actually showed this picture to several people last year, and they actually went there. So this is a place in Portugal, and it looks exactly like that. There's no optical illusion here. There's no camera trickery. So if you look at this picture, and I asked you all to think about where immediately would you like to be in this picture? Okay, so have a little quick think about that for a couple of seconds. If I asked you, I could drop you from helicopter, where would you be?
Dr. Moore, maybe they can write in the chat box.
Feel free to share. So would you like to be on the beach?
Yeah.
Would you like to be in the water? Would you like to be in the grass? Would you like to be on the rock? If you feel like you want to share, share. If not, I can completely understand that you not want to share stuff with a psychologist. So
I can't seem to see the picture.
You can't see the picture.
The picture is there.
No, I can see you, but I can't see the picture.
That's strange.
Where would the picture be?
It should be in the video link.
In the video, there is a video link there.
Oh, okay. It's because my video link is off.
No,
Okay.
Okay, I've switched to video.
Can you see it now?
No.
Yeah.
No, I can't see it.
Maybe you can deal with that later on. We'll see. I'll try to see why you're not seeing that. You can proceed, Dr.
Right.
Moore. Yeah.
Is just out of interest, is everyone else able to see the picture? Just so it's
people are responding.
you can see it. You can see it in memory. That's all right. Okay. So some of you would have picked the beach area. So some of you would have thought this area looks pretty nice, which is interesting. Some of you might have thought, actually, I want to know what is in that space before I get in the water. And now some of you who chose that area are now getting out of the water because I've now pointed out this area, which you might not have thought about before, because you kind of thought, actually, no, that was a bit rash. Actually, let me get out of the water now, because there could be something scary in that kind of dark area. Tell me about that first, and then I might think about the water. Now, some of you would have thought about this area on the top. So this is actually quite interesting. So as a general example, what I'm trying to say to you is that we can divide you all up in terms of your needs. So let's do this very simply. So those of you who chose this area, the needs that you have generally are immediate. So you're about kind of getting stuff now. I would imagine you're quite impatient. Okay, you want to experience the kind of sunshine. You want to experience the kind of water, the cold, cool water on your legs, and it looks quite nice. So this is all about individualism. Okay, and I'd imagine that your egos are pretty big. Okay, so it's all about you guys a lot of the time. So how do I feel about stuff? Now, what happens with a lot of employers is the fact that they think everybody is about them. So they think everybody, if we message up and deal with employers in terms of this is what it is about you. Okay, this is what you're going to get immediately. This is your salary. This is your status. These are the rewards you're going to get quickly. Now, for some people, that's quite important. But unfortunately, that's not important for everybody. So I would say if you split the world population, you're probably talking about 30% of the people in the world would be in this need zone about what am I getting right now? Okay. It's not about future development. It's not about what I'm investing in. It's about, if I do this, what the reward's going to be straight away. Now, the other thing is that what we forget about is that a large percentage of the population in the world are actually risk averse. Okay, so actually, by telling them their rewards, what you haven't done is address their anxieties about what are the risks involved here. So this is a typical situation when you're recruiting people. So the organization will tell the kind of the recruitee or the candidate all the lovely things about the organization. Okay, and as I said, that's going to be great for about 30% of your candidates. There's going to be another 35% of the candidates who are actually more about risk. What are the risks about joining this job? Okay, as an employer, I haven't told you about that because I'm telling you about all the nice things all the time. So they want to know about what's in the shadows. Yeah. And until you tell them that, they're not going to listen to you about all the rewards and all the potential within the organization. If you can be honest and transparent and say, look, to be honest with you, we've got, these are the things that are at risk, but we would hope you would come in and help us kind of resolve some of those things. Now you're being transparent with them. And transparency is a really undervalued kind of human connector. People like people to be honest and transparent. And also what you're doing is you're addressing their anxieties. So now they're listening to you. They're saying, you understand me because you know that I'm not about reward, that I'm about managing anxiety and risk. So you've just talked to me about what the risk is, and you've given me some potential solutions about what the risk might be if I join your company. Now I'm listening to you. Then you have another group of people, and they're not interested in risk, and they're not interested in immediate rewards. They are interested in exploration and development. So the people on the top of the cliffs, for example, these are people who want to know what next. What doors is this going to open to me? What are the opportunities? Where is this going to lead me? I'm not so bothered about the next 6 months, but I'm kind of interested in the next kind of 6 to 12 kind of years. Where could you take me? Okay, so they operate on another different communication system. So again, for them, they're not interested in you telling them what their salary is going to be or what their title is going to be. They're not interested in the risk. They're interested in how are you going to help me as a company develop as an individual. So if I join your organization, where is this going to take me? What new doors are going to open, for example? So it's quite interesting to think about this, I've talked about recruitment, but this is exactly the same in terms of employee kind of management and experience. How are you talking to your workforces? Is it all about immediate reward? So people have got a problem. Yeah, don't worry though, because you're going to get a bonus. Well, we've just established that 3 out of 10 people that will work, but 7 people, they'll be like, I don't care. That's not helped me because you haven't told me the risk and you haven't told me the opportunity. So I think we have to, as organizations, think much more now deeply about what drives people. So, and fortunately, there are only 10 kind of human needs. Okay. So you've got things like power, the need for power. There's the need for social inclusion and conformity. We're social creatures. Humans are part of social groups. The way our brain develops, we need other people to kind of give us feedback. So being integrated and being valued is actually an important need for humans. Stimulation is another one. You know, boredom. You will know what it's like to be bored. So, you know, overstimulation is something else, but just some stimulation is important for people. So there are kind of 10 of these needs. And as organizations, this is how you connect with your employees. Okay. You can mention salary and you can mention job title and you can mention reward schemes. I mean, those are important at one level, but for a long-term level, if you want to build loyalty, you have to start talking to people in terms of these kind of concepts. Okay. So they want to know, how much control do I have? Imagine yourself. It's not pleasant, is it, when you're in a situation where you don't have control or you can't predict what's going to happen next? Okay, that's quite stressful. It's a risk. So what do I do here and what's going to happen next? Most people want to know what the options are there. Now, funny enough, lots of organizations actually do not manage control very well. So they actually control the employee. And in terms of loyalty and productivity, that's pretty fatal, because that control is a really massive psychological mechanism that if you take that away from employees, you definitely get uncreativity, unproductivity, you get churn rates, people start leaving your organization, for example, and also their relationships with others break down, as we shall see. So this is why I'm so kind of passionate about this kind of area, because it does explain a lot of why people join organizations. It explains why they get motivated or become demotivated. And it certainly explains their kind of loyalty levels with you. Why do some people stay a long time with an organization? So if you take needs, then you can then think about, how do you message to your employees? Is it telling them what they might gain? So is it salary? Is it power? Is it respect? Is it they become part of a group? These are all things that they gain. Or can you address other needs? Is it reassuring them what they won't lose? So, by joining your organization, they get more safety. They become they might save time. They might get more time with their families. That's an underrated kind of value. Some people join organizations, they take pay cuts because they can spend more time at home with the family. So there are all sorts of psychological kind of mechanisms here at work that, if you think about it, are very much related to human needs. And then you have another group of people, as I said, who are all about kind of new opportunities. So it's about discovery. It's about, opening new doors. It's about acclaim. It's about exploration. So think about, in terms of you and your employees, I think you can kind of relate to this stuff. Are you talking to your employees on these kinds of things? Are you engaging with them? Because if you do, you're going to have much more meaningful engagement with them. And think about you as an employee. Think about what's important for you. And I would imagine some of the things I mentioned, you can kind of relate to. So look, we did a big project with Sony Music, to give you an example. And they'd spent, I won't tell you the figure, but it was a lot of money on a staff development system. So a big online system that helped employees develop skills and confidence and kind of, I suppose, new kind of skill sets in terms of their jobs. Okay, it looked great. The feedback was amazing. Everyone thought how great this kind of looked. It incorporated all the things that the employees wanted. They released it. 12 months later, it was quite shocking. Only 9% of the actual employees used the system, which is, think they just spent loads of money. What a waste of money. Why was that? They couldn't understand why this was. So we kind of went in with the psychology stuff, and we kind of worked out really that they hadn't addressed the needs of the employees really. So, there are a number of things that they hadn't understood. So one is that there are different types of learners. So some people learn by doing, which I learn by doing. Some people learn through interaction. So they learn by watching other people. And some people learn with a purpose. What does this give me? Why am I doing this? So it's a much more immediate reward system. So we kind of redeveloped things on that kind of basis. But the main thing that blocked people was the actual culture of the kind of Sony Music organization. So it's a very fast-paced organization, as you can imagine. It's very creative. And so what happens is people are fairly busy and they're constantly kind of balancing kind of plates. Unfortunately, that means that their perception is that the need of coping with work actually outplays the need for me as an individual to self-develop. So I have to keep juggling these plates. I don't have a time to look over here at this thing that's for me, that you've done this nice shiny package, because I'm too busy juggling these plates. And if I go over here, I'm not only going to drop one of these plates, and now you're going to point fingers at me and tell me that I've kind of failed, but Joe, who's behind me, who's not going to lean over and take time out, he's suddenly going to go forward and actually probably get more promotion than me because he's still juggling all his plates. So my needs are not met by you guys, and you haven't given me psychology permission to say, you know what, it's okay to drop some of these plates, because we'd rather you kind of develop yourself, because you're going to feel happier, you're going to feel more productive, and you're going to be more creative, which means that we get stuff and you stay longer. So this is kind of what we did. We redeveloped the kind of whole system to kind of think about, how do we give people permission to stop some work sometimes? And it's okay to kind of go out and spend an hour on this kind of system. We did it. And then again, a year later, we kind of just looked at the statistics. We'd gone from 9% to 60%. And we hadn't changed the content of the stuff. We'd rewrapped it and re-messaged it and kind of positioned it into, how are we meeting the needs of the employees now? How are we kind of explaining to them that actually this system is good for them, for their exploration? It's good for their risk management, for example. So it can be quite powerful in terms of how you understand the needs and how you deploy them. So we've got non-conscious things and we've now got needs. And I want to talk to you very specifically quickly about how you manage the needs within the work context. So what we know about kind of productivity and work commitment, or loyalty or trust, is that there are roughly kind of 6 things that input and influence those kind of productivity and employee trust. One's control, one is work demand, one is work purpose, one is the support we're getting, one is the clarity of my role, and one is the kind of the depth and strength and quality of my relationships. So let's look at these very quickly in isolation. So the need for relationships. Okay, so I've already established that, you know, humans are social creatures. Our brains are designed to interact with others. So people who become isolated suffer much more mental health problems because they're not having that social interaction. So we know this is important. Okay, so given that, then we can understand that poor relationships at work are, you know, very detrimental to kind of productivity and kind of trust. Because, you know, if you're constantly working in an office that's got a bad atmosphere, you've got inconsistent behavior between your colleagues, and you can't trust them. They say one thing to you and they do another. You don't understand what your managers want from you. They're not being transparent. They're not being open with you. There's a high blame culture that when you do things wrong, you get more of a reaction than when you do something right. And so you experience what's called low levels of psychology safety. Okay, so your needs are not being met here. So look, this is really interesting, because what happens is we extinguish the need to explore and learn. Okay, when we're in a hostile environment, what happens is we actually then become defensive. And when we become defensive, the brain shuts down. It becomes narrow. Okay, so we actually form a defensive line and we kind of sit behind it and we just chug along very slowly. We just do our work, nothing else. So actually, we're not very kind of contributory to kind of how the organization is developing. So relationships are a really important kind of cornerstone in terms of organizations, as you probably know. Hopefully, what we now understand is why that is. And that is because, from a psychology point of view, you're not creating the kind of need environment that people will have in terms of exploration and development and motivation. So if you combine these things, it becomes even more kind of terrible in terms of the experience you're creating. So look, the next thing to do is, have you got, or have you established with your employee, a clear job role for them? And uncertainty, no one likes uncertainty. We don't know whether, should we be doing this? Shouldn't we be doing this? What should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? That creates a lot of effort and a lot of anxiety. So you need to establish with people very clear expectations. Okay. And also not immediately what they're doing, but how does their role fit with where the organization's going? If you can tell them what they're doing is making a contribution to where the organization is going, that's going to motivate them, because they go, wow, I'm making a difference. Whereas if you don't tell people, people go, well, I'm not really sure. I've been working here 9 hours today. I don't know whether this is having any impact. I'm doing any good. I'm not doing any good. What's going on here? The dial's moving. No one's telling me. I don't know. So we have to actually fight against this feeling of undervalue. Okay. So really try to think about, have you explained, have you told people where they fit within the company and where the company's kind of going? That for me is something that's kind of unfortunately ignored quite a lot. And this lack of control from a psychology point of view, again, is essential, because if you don't know what's going to happen, you can't predict what your role is. You can't predict what will happen next. You can't predict what the reactions will be from your work. Then you're going to get stressed. You're going to get kind of anxious. That leads to poor health. You have a weak sense of ownership. You have no idea whether what the work you're doing is any good, making a difference. And so you kind of develop what's called this learned helplessness. So what happens here is you disengage. You don't try. You don't go over the top. You don't make any effort. You just do the bare minimum. Okay. And it's not your fault, because you have no idea of kind of what's going on in the bigger picture. So what you tend to do is withdraw and kind of, sit in the corner and say, well, I'll just do my bit. I won't do any more, because I got no feeling of what this kind of means in terms of where the company's going. So again, you have to be careful there. The kind of middle one is about job support. So, no one likes feeling alone all the time at work. Admittedly, some people like working alone most of the time, but even those people like to share ideas, like to know that they have a place within a team at some point. And knowing that your team have your back is actually psychologically really important. Knowing you have that support shouldn't be underestimated. So, you kind of think about lack of appreciation, lack of constructive feedback. These things will demotivate people. And again, what happens is their creativity suffers, their well-being suffers, their trust suffers, their productivity becomes kind of low. So it's that, are you feeding back to people? And again, it's not just about positive feedback, it's constructive feedback about failure, as we shall see. So, you know, you shouldn't just be saying, great job, which is important. It's how can we make people, you know, if they've made a mistake, understand what that mistake is, learn from it, and kind of move on. Because mistakes are great, because it kind of, mistakes help people learn generally. You know, if you got everything right all the time, we're not learning anything. So this gets to my kind of point about socialization. So, you know, if you're isolated, you might not be, but if you perceive that you're isolated, even people in open plan offices with 100 people in their office can feel socially isolated. If you don't feel connected to people, if you don't feel that you have the shared values, if you're not moving in the same direction, okay, so you get, you know, levels of absenteeism will go up, churn rates will increase, your kind of turnover of staff will increase, and you won't get that loyalty. So people won't buy into things. It becomes harder to motivate. It becomes harder to sell things in, especially when you're thinking about new products or new ways of working. You know, people resist that. So again, this thing is really important. So we worked with the kind of biggest food and drink distributor in the Middle East. And their challenge was the fact, this is really interesting, that none of their staff, okay, were engaging in feedback. Okay, so none of them they were interacting with people, but none of them were sharing knowledge. None of them were actually helping people solve problems. And again, this was really interesting. They're quite a large organization, and they wanted to work out why that was. And because, back to my kind of point I made about 10 minutes ago, actually what was happening here is that none of the employees felt psychologically safe to share. There was a very finger pointing kind of culture of, when you do something right, that is just accepted of you. You don't get any feedback. However, should you do something wrong, then people start to point fingers and kind of blame you. And obviously then you become kind of, whoa, what's happening here? So what happens is, again, people tend to kind of hunker down and get very defensive. And so their default is, if I don't say anything to anyone, I can't get into trouble. And of course, that's not very helpful for anybody. So we had to look about, how do we change that employee's behavior by developing a more open sharing kind of system here? What are the psychology mechanisms? So we worked with the kind of the leadership team in terms of training and their openness to ideas about the needs and understanding the needs of the employees, and then ways of how they then do a new feedback system in terms of understanding success and failure, and making people feel that they're part of a team and that the organization is all about success and failure. That's how it kind of succeeds. And again, that was really interesting, and it made a very big difference. Again, we're not changing any of the content, but we're changing the way people deal, the way they package up how they deal with their staff. So HR were really involved in this project, and they said it was one of the most successful things they've ever done in terms of their employees. And so again, a year later, what we found is that kind of suddenly feedback rates increased. People were feeding into new ideas and new products. Creativity flourished. It was really interesting to see the kind of side effects of this. And just in a simple rewrap of how we expect and treat the communications with people. So one of the other areas, and we're getting near the end of the presentation now, is job demand. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Well, it's kind of, what does my job entail in terms of what is the workload? What's the remit? What bits make up my job and what bits actually are not part of my job? And this can create all sorts of psychological problems, because you have, you know, incapacity because you're overloaded. You have insufficient time to complete everything. Sometimes the job demands are not matching your skill sets. And you're kind of thinking, why am I being asked to do this? Because I don't have the skill set to do this. And that happens a lot, for example. And again, you get back to this lack of control. So the actual job itself, not only your job title, but your job kind of role and demand, again, should be really clearly established from people, so they don't set up these non-conscious expectations of, hey, that's not my job, that's not what I've been employed for, this is extra to what I kind of do. And again, people get very kind of reticent and start getting defensive. So that clarity around the job is, you know, pretty important. And, you know, we've only got so much cognitive capacity, and once we're full, we become starting to get stressed then. And then when we kind of are overloaded, we start to feel stupid, we start to feel useless, we start to feel unable, we start to feel weak. And, you know, and employees who are stupid, useless, unable and weak are no good to anybody. Okay, because they get their self-esteem gets affected. They lose self-worth. They disengage both from the job and the role and from their colleagues. So it's how do we ensure that people are working at a great rate but are not kind of overloaded? And that gets down to the definition of, again, what is it expected, the expectations of the people here involved. And one of the last things is the ownership. So ownership is another psychology concept here. If you feel that you have no influence over what tasks you get and how you actually complete them, again, from a human point of view, that creates all sorts of problems because, again, you feel out of control. So if you can't contribute, you kind of feel, well, why am I here? What's my point? Shall I just give up and not do anything? So people should be allowed to feel kind of that they can contribute, that they can own and share ideas, that they can be part of the team, no matter who they are. I've seen people in the old post rooms kind of be included in management team meetings and come up with some really, really interesting ideas because they're coming at it from a completely different perspective. So we should be quite inclusive with our kind of employees about, if you're trying to design new things or come up with solutions, we should get representatives from all sorts of people, HR, sales, marketing, kind of, digital, get everyone in the room, because you never know, they might come up with a kind of very interesting idea that as one team, like the sales team, would have never thought about, for example. So, ownership gives people clarity. It gives them pride in what they're doing. If I own something, I know I'm responsible for it. I can feel proud if it works out. I'm accountable for it as well. So actually, I'm really motivated to make sure it gets done properly. If I own it, if I know this is my job and my task, then I'm going to make sure I probably do it to my best ability. So you can see the psychology connotations here about why these kind of human needs and meeting things like emotions and pride and self-esteem are really, really essential here with employee management. So to end then, we talked a lot about, and I'm very conscious of the fact that we touched on these things very quickly, but it hopefully given you some things to think about and investigate a bit further. But what are the solutions to some of the things that we've kind of talked about then? We mentioned them quickly. So we've kind of developed on the back of this a kind of psychology tool it's a digital online tool that measures all the things that we've kind of mentioned about employees and what's important to them from a non-conscious point of view. So my point is, there are tools out there that companies can use from a psychology point of view that actually make visible all these kind of hidden concepts that kind of impact the kind of purpose, productivity, creativity, trust of employees. And as I said, look, 90% what makes this happen is hidden because it's in a non-conscious world. It's in the emotional world of the employee. If we can bring these things out and measure them and understand them, then employers are in a much better position about how do they talk to people? How do they motivate people? So look, it's about being approachable. Okay, and it's really shocking how many leaders do not make themselves approachable, how many organizations don't make themselves approachable. Are you open for discussion? You may not agree with the person, but do you let them discuss it anyway? Okay, are you open to their input, or do you close people off? Again, that's a really important kind of tool. To allow people to be engaged and be included is really psychologically important. They feel part of the group. And then one other thing that's really, really important is, if I was going to give us some advice, is, fallibility, or it's acceptable to fail. And, if you sweep mistakes under the carpet or throw them out the window, what signal you're giving to your employees is it's not good to fail. And so actually all sorts of problems can actually happen then. And they become obviously very distrustful of you. They're very distrustful of the company because they won't want to share their mistakes. They'll hide them. And that can be really deadly for a company if people are hiding their mistakes. So if leaders lead by saying, look, I made a mistake. Hey, we're all human. We make mistakes, but we're going to learn from this. What happens then is you've given the signal for that creative open output of, well, okay, so it's okay to make mistakes. And that's good because mistakes are the biggest thing to actually learning. Okay, they're the quickest thing to make people learn and be creative. So I've summed up some very practical tips. I'm not going to go through them. You can do these online. I think, remember, we're going to share these slides, aren't we, with the kind of people afterwards. But I've given you some very quick 2 pages of tips about what you should think about and how you might then kind of, level that as a solution. So, things like setting goals, collaborating with people. And then on other slides, we've got things about, allow mistakes, be inclusive, ask questions, and ask for delivery. So I've given you the reasons about why these are important. I'm very, very conscious of the fact that we covered a lot of material in a very short moment of time. But what I wanted to do is kind of almost open up the opportunities here and probably give some insight about the kind of the hidden world of the employee. Why do they do things? Why do they feel the way they feel? Why do they not feel connected? Why are they becoming unproductive? Why are some people more creative than others? And hopefully from what we've covered in the last kind of 40 minutes, we have a better understanding of what we should probably be trying to measure in terms of helping us as employers kind of build those kind of very positive, kind of moving forward organizations. So I'm going to be quiet now. I've done a lot of talking, and I appreciate the fact you kind of listened to me for a while. I'm happy, Memory, for questions if we've got time now. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Moore. I think a very good presentation and insights on some of the issues that we take for granted. Hopefully the HR managers and psychologists here got a better understanding of some of the issues. I'll ask questions. I'll start with the question that have been put on the platform privately. I'll start with the first one. In light of the COVID situation, many employees are now working from home, or if at work they are very distant from each other. How do you handle the social isolation aspect in human interaction, which is vital for psychological?
Yeah, really good question. So it's important to so they may well be in teams, for example, and you may have done Zoom calls and things. I think a lot of organizations are realizing that work team calls are great, but also social calls as well. So one idea is the fact that if you're having lunch at home, then why not have lunch with a couple of your colleagues who are at the same time? So, and you don't have to talk about work, because that's a lot of the connectivity at work, isn't it? It's not just about talking about work. So work colleagues talk about life. They talk about their families. They talk about their experiences. And that's one thing that we're missing with the COVID-19 situation is we're still doing our work and we're still interacting with work colleagues over the email and on kind of things like Zoom. What we're missing, though, are those more kind of non-work interactions with our work colleagues. How are they feeling? What's going on in their life? So one of the kind of initiatives I've seen that's worked really well is like some companies have been kind of like joining people up for breakfast or lunch so that they, in the workday, they actually feel that there is someone else that they can just chat to. And yes, they can talk to work colleagues at other times. And I've seen this work really effectively with people. And I'm not talking that you should kind of have breakfast with, 65 of your employee friends. Pick a couple of people who you would naturally kind of have at work. Just spend, even if it's like a quick kind of lunch break, 20 minutes, and talk loads of stuff about that doesn't deal with work. I think that's really psychologically important to kind of, that's what people are missing here really in this kind of lockdown situation.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got other questions. Let's go to the next one. How do we as HR engage management on improving culture and how to measure it?
It's always an important issue, isn't it? And I think some of the slides I mentioned today, when we present them with executive groups, I think it's a bit of an eye opener in terms of, oh wow, we hadn't thought about any of this stuff. So one of the things that we've been doing is actually offering executive groups kind of almost complimentary workshops in this area. It might be like half an hour of kind of some of the stuff we've done to kind of almost just open their eyes a little bit and give them sort of new information about why people and how you might kind of better interact and help and support and kind of develop their employees. And these have gone down quite well, actually, because you're not relying on the HR manager to fight their fight and say, we need to be doing more. It's a very neutral way of saying, look, there is someone here willing to do a little talk around some topics that might be of interest to us. It's free, but it's not me. I don't take, as HR manager, the risk is not on me because it's not me arguing. I'm letting someone talk and you can either lean into it or lean away. But I agree, it's a really hard thing to do. How do you get your management to kind of change, And how do you get a leopard to change their spots in terms of if they've always done it in a certain way, why would they change? And it's always a question that comes up whenever we do these kinds of sessions. How do I get my management to listen? And I guess, well, we're going to share some of these slides. So feel free to, if you think they're going to, cause some reaction or someone to think about things in a different way, feel free to share the slides. I think anything around this kind of psychology stuff is interesting to most people. It certainly makes people sit up and think about things for a little while in a different way.
Yep. The other question is, I think this is specific to Zim's situation. Currently, employees think about rewards more than anything else given inflation, because we're in almost hyperinflation. Delayed rewards like pension become meaningless. It's a statement, I think, we were talking about rewards and things like that. What would be the purpose of a pension now? But I also thought in your response you indicated things like money and all the pay and things like that. They only form less than around 10% of what matters to the employee.
Yeah, so I'm not saying they're not unimportant, because obviously everyone needs to live and eat and kind of, house and family. But what I'm saying in terms of the emotional experience is that let's flip it around a bit. So I know people who are on, they could be on a lot bigger wages if they wanted to be. But they've chosen not to be because they actually feel emotionally more positive at that organization. So that's one side of things. But I do actually understand that, salaries are really important. And the situation that you've described about pensions, humans are very funny anyway. So if I offered most people, $10 now or $30 in 4 weeks' time, probably 80% of the people would take the $10 now, even though they would get more money. And even though it's free, I'm not asking them to do anything. And that's because psychologically, our brains want immediate things. And so things like, this is why lots of people don't actually subscribe to pension schemes, because they think, oh, that's too far ahead. That's taking money away from me now. I need the money now. And then when they retire, they kind of go, oh, I wish I'd taken a pension out. So it's funny how the brain kind of fools us. But yeah, it's how do we balance that kind of financial aspect with the psychology stuff? Of course, people have got to feel appreciated by a salary. But I wouldn't say, so the opposite can happen. You can actually create stress by overpaying people. And I know that sounds really silly, but I've seen people leave organizations because they feel they're getting paid too much and they can't justify why they're getting that salary. And that sounds like, if I told you guys, you're like, are they crazy? Why? They're on a great thing. Why would they leave? But they do, because they feel like, oh my goodness, I feel bad because I feel like I'm being paid too much money for what I'm doing. So it can work the other way as well. As well as being paid too less, you can get paid too more, and it just shows you the power of the sort of psychology of emotions and stuff. But from a practical point of view, I guess if you can fuse together. So one scheme I've seen is in terms of a pension and a reward. If you can kind of come up with a system that says the reward you've earned a reward this month from your kind of like work. And I've seen some people divide the reward. So the bonus they get, half they get at the end of the month, and the other half they put into the pension or put into a pension pot, because that's not so painful, because at least you're getting some reward, but at the same time you're seeing some money go into the future. So it's kind of ticking both boxes without kind of having to give out lots of money really quickly to people. You've given half money out than what you really wanted to do. So there are probable ways that you could do it, but I do admit it's very difficult under the current circumstances to, how do you kind of ensure that people are getting paid what they think is what they should be paid? Mm-hmm. That's never changed in the last 300 years of work. That question is always kind of recurring. How do we make sure people are getting paid what they pay, and how do we make sure we've got the money to pay them?
Yeah. I've got before I open the session for people maybe to ask questions directly. You talked about unconscious activities, basically automated.
Yes.
That made me think of Daniel Kahneman when he talked about system 1 and systems 2 thinking. What are the consequences in terms of the actual work when someone engages in automated thinking?
In terms of discovering and understanding it, from the employee point of view?
Yes.
Yeah, so we do. There are tools. So we have lots of tools that can actually measure the non-conscious. As psychologists, we're obviously trained in this area, so we have lots of online tools that can train people and also understand what they really feel important. So I'll give you a really good example of this. So we worked with Deutsche Bank recently, and Deutsche Bank said people don't trust banks. Okay, so no shock there. Yeah, so they wanted to do a marketing campaign around, you can trust us as a bank, we're different than any other bank. It failed miserably, and they actually lost 9% of their staff, their kind of customers as a result. And you kind of think, oh my goodness, what went on there? Right, so from a non-conscious point of view, when we measured the customers said, hey, I trust a bank because they don't just kind of come overnight. They're full of people who know what they're doing, and they're fairly safe. I might say I don't trust the bank, but that's just because I'm not satisfied with the bank. I actually do trust the bank. What I don't trust is myself with my money. Yeah, so this is really funny, and some of you might relate to this. So actually, the level of my knowledge about my money is I really know only two things: when I'm about to get paid and when I'm in debt. Other than that, I don't really know much else about my finances. So actually, I don't trust myself. So when we understood that and we helped Deutsche Bank then interact with their customers to help them have a better confidence about their money. So we actually did training with customers about their kind of bank accounts and stuff like that. And that suddenly we got something like 26 new % of customers because we started to play into that space. So to your point, Memory, you can measure the non-conscious, and you should never, never, never listen to what employees tell you and take it at face value, because there are lots of biases there. They might feel that they can't tell you stuff because you're going to judge them or penalize them. They might not say stuff because they feel their peers or their people around them are going to judge them. They might feel they don't tell you stuff that's important because they think you're not going to listen to them. They might not tell you stuff because they don't even know that it's actually important. So there are lots of reasons why people might give you misinformation. And you then start to if you just work on what they tell you. This is why surveys and questionnaires go wrong all the time. The number of people have told me, we did this massive survey and 95% of people told us this, and we did that and nothing happened. Why is that? What's going on? They're crazy. They're telling us one thing and doing another. That's humans for you. They'll tell you one thing and do another. Unless you can measure that non-conscious world, it's a problem.
Okay. Yes, we've got a question here, a hand up, where the person is written here, mental health advocacy. Can you proceed? Unmute yourself and ask your question. I have unmuted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can I speak now?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello.
Okay. Hi. Very great presentation. I worked for a blue chip company for 23 years. And some of the things you have said there, I found very useful, and I wish our HR managers were in the picture with them. So the question that I have is, since the HR dynamics have changed in Zimbabwe due to our economy, are any concern, do these, does this really work in an economy like Zimbabwe? Do they still organizations that actually request you to actually do these consultations? And probably maybe Mr. Ngowi can chip in, since he's actually in Zimbabwe, to say, are they still organizations that actually value this kind of feedback, because they actually and would actually help struggling companies. They raise the loyalty or would improve productivity and improve the performance of organizations.
Thank you.
And my other second question is, before I go, I was one employee who had vowed never to leave formal employment. However, our organization started to deliberately frustrate us by being heavy-handed in discipline regardless of the offense that had been committed. So I wanted to find out that this is actually a strategy, because a couple of months down the line, they then offered early retirement and it was oversubscribed. So that's my second question.
Okay, let me, Dr. Moore, let me start with the first one, where she was talking about organizations doing these things to understand what employees think about issues and things like that. It's happening. In actual fact, the number of surveys that are happening are so many of them. But I think there are two challenges. The first one is some of the questionnaires and surveys that are being used are actually unreliable. So people just design their own questionnaire, no substantive psychological construct behind it. So it's really, if I were to put it bluntly, a useless questionnaire, because what you get there are not stable factors.
Listen, this happens everywhere. It's not just you guys. It happens in London as well. I'm shocked at the number of questionnaires I come across in London even. It happens in America. It happens in India. Wherever we work, we are always surprised about when we ask where the questionnaire come from. It's kind of someone sat down over a cup of coffee and decided to ask 16 questions, and that's the basis of the questionnaire. So, I mean, some of these things can be interesting because they can elicit stuff, but to use that only as the source of where you're going to do change is actually quite a risk. And as you've kind of seen, you need kind of specialist help here to understand and unlock that non-conscious kind of aspects of human behavior, because people don't lie to you. People are just not aware why they do things. If I asked you why you do certain things, I would imagine some of the times you'd struggle to give me an answer about actually, why do I do that? So I completely agree. I think as much help as you can get in terms of these things would be good. The fact that, Memory, you've said that a lot of organizations are kind of starting these things is really encouraging. I don't think in any way, in shape or form that you're anywhere behind anywhere else in the world. There are some countries who are doing the same. I would say even in the UK, there are a vast majority of kind of organizations who are in the world that you've just described. They're doing it in-house and they're doing it really badly. And it's a big risk to their organization. So on that's the first kind of response to the first question.
Then there may be another addition to the first question is that I think one of the challenges as well is that after doing all these surveys, management gets unpleasant information about certain issues. They keep it under the reps and they don't want to discuss with the employees. They accuse employees of being ungrateful and they keep it for 2 years. After 2 years, they come back and say, let's do another survey. The response rate goes down. People don't trust them anymore. So those are the reaction that we normally get out of some of these surveys.
Yeah, no, and that's a horrible situation, isn't it? When you get asked by your kind of employees to fill in a questionnaire about the kind of company, and you think, oh, actually, they're going to listen to us, and this is actually quite positive, and the fact I'm allowed to kind of feedback now. And then how demotivating is it when then nothing happens? In fact, it does the opposite. It makes you angry and irritated, probably. So you've made the situation worse. I never understand why these people do this. But what happens is in a blame culture, you'll have the managers hide information because they are responsible for their team. So any negative information that gets put upwards to the manager sometimes will be hidden in an environment where it's not conducive to fail and risk and kind of and move forward and collaborate with one another. What will happen is they'll get rid of that information because it looks bad on that manager. So I completely sympathize with you. And again, I don't think that's unusual. That happens over here as much as it does everywhere else. And I think the positive is that companies are starting to change and realize that that's not very helpful. It will probably be a slow change, but it's encouraging that, more and more companies are saying that is not very helpful for productivity. It's not very helpful for the long-term health of the organization. And it's not very good for the sort of long-term health of the employee either. One
of the issues again on that issue, Dr. Moore, is that sometimes when companies, in terms of doing some of these surveys and understanding the issues that affect employees, maybe they're going through a restructuring or they are not paying very well. The answers that you normally get is, no, we are not doing this year because we are experiencing problems. So we want this to pass so that we can start doing the surveys when things are normal. the advice, the correct advice, there's no normal time for survey. It's actually, when you're actually experiencing problems, it's actually good to collect some of this information so that you can do comparisons between different periods of your
and to your point, Mary, that's a really good point. And the other point is that if you do ask your employees, you might find there's a problem that outweighs all the other problems that you can actually resolve very quickly.
Yeah.
And doing something is better than doing nothing. You know, and you may be resource strapped. You may not have the resources and money to solve all the problems, but the clear gesture of doing or trying to tackle one problem gives everyone hope. And they think, you know what, you are trying. I know you're kind of like, you don't have the resources, but at least you're trying to do something. And that gives us positivity to know that you are responding to us. So my levels of trust in you have gone up. My levels of loyalty of you have gone up. So it doesn't take many gestures to actually encourage productivity and loyalty. I think a lot of employers think they have to make these really big magnanimous kind of gestures, and like, it's really expensive. It's not. Actually, to get loyalty, think about your relationships with people. You don't have to do a lot to keep your friends loyal to you or your partners. You know, we think we have to make these big gestures. It's very simple to kind of keep people within your circle and like you and trust you. Is just, you know, be open, be nice to them, and be responsive when you can.
Yeah. Okay, the other question is where an employer really becomes very aggressive, ill-treat employees, then a few months later, they offer a voluntary early retirement to get rid of some headcount. My view on that will be really a bad culture in the organization. If you're not open, these are really aggressive people who are not open to their employees all the time. So it's really about the leadership of the organization from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a very kind of top-down controlled executive who just, you know, they want to be in control of everything. It's all about profit and it's all about the organization, and it's not about the employees. So the employees are just resources to them. And that's one of the most toxic organizations that we probably come across. Yeah. So, you know, if I was that person, I understand everyone's situation is different. I would jump on that early retirement package.
Thank you. Let me take two more questions. I think we are over our time now. Let me take two more questions. There are any questions from the participants?
Hi, Memory.
Yes, Prosper, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mo, for your presentation. It's quite enlightening one. Two things I wanted to ask. One about you raised an issue on cognitive or representativeness heuristics, and I wanted to find out what in your experience do you do to get those things not to affect employee engagement and productivity, for example. And then with experienced employees, you realize that they use manager skills to sort of manipulate a manager or a supervisor's attitude towards them. How do you deal with that psychologically or otherwise?
Well, both really interesting questions. I'm going to answer your second one first, if I may, and that's really interesting. So when you start talking about manipulation, that usually means that the employee is not happy about something, and they're not engaged, and they're using their methods to try and create that change themselves. So they get manipulative because they feel that there is no other option. So, you know, HR or the management system is not giving them that opportunity to change from their point of view. So they'll have to use their own means and skills to cause that change as well. So that's where manipulation comes from. So that all stems from the fact that that individual perceives that there are no other routes. And so we have to think about how do we give them another option. And what we've seen when you start giving people other options and you start kind of alluding to the fact that the management do listen and change, that all forms of manipulation stop quite quickly because people feel they don't need to do that. So that's in answer to your kind of second question. Remind me what the first question was again. I'm getting old, sorry.
Prosper?
What was the first question? First question was, you mentioned cognitive.
Oh, yes.
Heuristics and representativeness heuristics, for example.
Yeah.
You realize when someone gets used to a job, like you spoke about automation, gets used to doing things the way they do things. They don't like think about or maybe being innovative. How can I improve what I'm doing today? And you realize they keep doing the same thing. If it's a production line, for example, if someone is coming up with 20 units of a product, they do that throughout the month. There's no improvement, maybe to 21 units or so, because they don't want to think. They're just used to automating sort of whatever they do.
Yeah,
because
again, that's a really good question, and again, that's a real problem for a lot of organisations. So I'd imagine there's a number of things that are causing that to happen, and you're right, it is about that kind of representation heuristics. The other heuristics that you could level are the sort of social comparisons heuristics. So you could actually get inadvertently that person to compare themselves to the other people around them. So if they're doing 20 and they realise that their peer group are doing 24, I would imagine you probably get a change quite quickly because they don't want to be the odd one out. But you have to be a little bit careful with that. And then I guess it's we get back to the human needs. Why would that person change? Because at the moment, that person's giving you reasons about why they shouldn't change. So we need to think about, what does that person need? So them as an individual, what's going to motivate them? So how are we going to turn that 20 into 22? So is it about the new opportunity? Is it about their self-esteem? Is it about that they can start boasting to others, look at me, I'm better at what I do? So we have to think and get to know that person a little bit to understand, what is the message that I need to kind of use against them to kind of up that productivity a little bit.
Yeah.
So may I just add a factor there, maybe even when there is a production incentive bonus.
Yeah, you could do it, but it might be status. So, for example, this is why the employees of the month or the employee of the week things all kind of started to happen, is the fact that they realize that some people feel very proud about that. Some people's egos are quite big, and that suits them because they can show off. Yeah. But you have to be a bit careful with that, because some people get a bit embarrassed about it as well. So that's why we need to think about, who is this person a little bit more.
Yeah, let me give Nyasha maybe two more questions. One on the platform, on the chat platform, and another on Nyasha. Can you ask your question?
Okay, thanks very much, Memory. Thanks, Dr. Moore. This has been really, really enlightening. So my question is, when we're talking back to employee psychology and engagement, there are some times in this environment when you need to give tough pieces of news to employees. So I'll say, for example, that we have been in third month of not going to the office, and you've got a whole lot of employees who have not been presenting themselves to work. So when you need to make a call with regards to redundancies or pay cuts or leveling annual leave against the people not having been at work, what are some of the tips around engaging with an employee remotely and being able to land bad news, but still in a way that is respectful, that is engaging to employees, and that sits well? It's really easy when you're face to face, or not really easy, but it's much easier when you're face to face, and you can engage and But so, what are some of the tips around that?
Again, really smart question in this kind of context. So I'll start where you ended. I would do it, if you can do it via Zoom face to face, that will really help, because people will judge, they're going to be looking at you to see whether you're enjoying this or not. And when they see that you're finding it really awkward, you're going to get some sympathy, because they're realizing from your non-verbal kind of facial expressions that, this is awkward for you and that you're not enjoying it. And so, there are all sorts of misperceptions about people. When you do it I've seen people do this in emails. I've seen people do this over the phone, and you can listen, you can hear people actually misperceive it and go, oh, they're enjoying this, or they've been dying to do this for years with me, which is clearly not the case. So that's kind of one aspect to it. And the other aspect is to just be transparent and give them the reason, give them a clear reason why this is happening. It's nothing against them personally. The context, as you've described, is very unusual at the moment. Lots of people are in the same situation. Lots of companies are in the same situation. So, you may even cite other companies where it's even worse, for example. So they get a relative comparison. So, where you're saying, well, look, we've managed to kind of keep this going for a few months. Unlike X company, for example, who they lost 50% of their staff in the first 2 weeks. So we have really tried as best we can to kind of cope with the situation. But given the fact now we're in the third month, whatever month we're in, You know, we're finding it as a company really difficult, and this is the reason why. And if it's a temporary thing, you know, explain the fact that you know, we may well be able to re-employ you once we have greater clarity. We're not making any promises, but it's that transparency, I think, is really important as well. The fact that, you know, the reasons are not personal and that they're attributed to something that the person kind of relate to. And I think those non-verbal cues will help there, because you know, they look at you and go, well, I can tell that this person's not enjoying this, and it is actually a really hard thing that they're doing, and they probably appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Masha. I think we have gone now roughly over an hour and 20 minutes. So I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Moore, for this session. You are going to share with me the presentation in PDF. I will share with all the participants. And also remember, to all the participants, this session has been recorded. We'll share the link with you so that you can go over it again. I'll also, for those that would like to contact Dr. Moore for further clarification, I'll give you his email address. Later on, you can just WhatsApp me or send me an email. I'll be able to share with you his email address. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending this session. We hope you attend others in future. I also hope to bring Dr. Moore again in future. I'll talk to him after this so that we can look at other topics of interest, being psychologists, both of us. We should have more things to come. And for the participants, I think through our platforms on WhatsApp, you're also free to share other topics that you may think we need to address so that we can bring speakers across the globe to deal with these issues. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. And thank you for the really interesting questions. So I found, you know, really smart. Thank you very much. Thanks, Memory.
Thank you.